Hey everyone, it's Matt here with Nightrun Studio, and in this video, we're setting up our skill tree. By the end of the video, you'll be able to create skills, upgrade them, and set special prerequisites for unlocking new tiers in your tree. Eventually, we'll also hook this up to our existing systems, so that we can upgrade stats, unlock new abilities, and gain skill points when gaining levels. But that part will come in the next video. So, let's get started. Setting up our skill tree is going to include 3 scripts. The first is a scriptable object, which will store data about our skills, like its name, how many times you can upgrade it, and its display icon. The second script will be for the skill slots themselves. This will determine things like what prerequisites you need to unlock new tiers. And finally, we'll also have a skill tree manager. This will pull it all together and also handle our skill points. Alright, so our first step is to create some skills. First, let's make a new folder for these scripts. We can call it skill tree. And then let's create a new C# script, which we can call skill.so for a scriptable object. Now, scriptable objects are not mono behaviors. They aren't added to objects like normal components. This means we won't have access to the start and update methods. We can make sure that this inherits from scriptable object instead of mono behavior, and then we can create some references. Our first one will be a public string, which is the skill name. We'll also make a public integer for its max level, how many times you can upgrade it, and finally a public sprite, which will be the icon that will appear on the skill slot. At this point, we're going to come above the class name and we're going to type create asset menu. Here we're just going to put file name equals, here we'll put new skill, and then we're also going to make a menu name, which will equal skill tree / skill. And I'll delete that extra bracket I threw in there for no reason. Adding that asset menu section allows us to create skill tree now. And we can go to skill in order to make as many of these scriptable objects as we want. We can just give them a name. I'll call this one max health boost. And then over on the right here, we can type the actual skill name as we may want it to appear in the game later on, how many levels it will have, and we can also attach our skill icon. I'm going to attach my heart for this one. If you wanted to, you could go ahead and make a whole bunch of skills right now, but I'm just going to do the one for the moment. Now that we've got our skills created, let's create our skill slot script. So we can go create C# script and call it skill slot. Before we do anything else, we just want to hook our skill slot up to a specific scriptable object. So let's make a public skill.so reference called skill.so. And our first task is going to be to make it so that the scriptable object can actually control the appearance of each skill slot. So to do this, we need a reference to its image. So we'll make a public image called the skill icon. And here we just need to add the namespace that we are using unityengine.ui. That'll take care of that error. At this point, we can create a private void on validate method. So now we'll just add a little defensive check to make sure we've actually assigned a scriptable object before we try to run this code. And if we have, then we'll make it so that the image's sprite for this slot is replaced by the sprite that we've assigned in the scriptable object. At this point, we can do our first test. So I'm just going to go into my combat panel here where I've got all of my different skill buttons. And I don't want to have to add this onto each of them, which is why we made them into prefabs. So I'm just going to click the prefab itself. I'll go into scene view here just so I can kind of see it. It's unimpressive looking. And on the parent object here, I'll just close up these other components to make things cleaner and easier to see. We're going to go add component and put our skill slot in here. Now for the moment, we don't want to fill this scriptable object as that will be different for each one, but we can fill the icon by heading over to our skill icon and dragging it into that box. Now when we leave the prefab, we can see that each of our skill buttons now has its skill icon assigned. And we can actually just go about adding our scriptable object if we like. So I can click on object number 2 here. And if I go into my skill tree and grab the max health boost, I can drag it into that box. And you'll notice that as soon as I did, it changed the appearance of that icon. All right, things are working well so far. Now our next step will be to add some text to these slots. For example, we might want it to say locked if we haven't unlocked them yet, or to show how many times we've upgraded it. So we'll begin here by creating a public int, which will be the current level of the slot. Then we'll make a public bool, which will be whether or not it has been unlocked. We'll call this isUnlocked. Now that we've got that data, we can create the text reference to actually display it. So we'll head up top and add the using TM Pro namespace, and then create a public TMP_text reference, which will be our skill level text. Now, I'm going to try to avoid duplicating code by writing it in multiple places, as On validate, we'll be updating our UI, but we're also going to want to update our UI anytime our data changes. So let's just create one private void update UI method, which we can call anytime we want it updated. So in our onValidate method, we can add update UI. And let's just grab this function we've already made and put it in there. Now another thing we're going to want to do is every time we update our UI, we're going to want to check to see if that slot has been unlocked. Now if the slot has been unlocked, then we want its skill level text to be equal to our current level. Now remember, current level is an integer and text is a string. So in order for them to talk to each other, we need to convert that to string. So we'll display the number. We'll then add a slash, and then we'll go look at our scriptable object and see what its max level is and convert that to a string. Now another thing we'll do here is just make it so that our skill icon's color will be set to white if we have unlocked it. And so we'll add an else statement here so that if the slot has not yet been unlocked, our skill icon's color can be set to gray. Additionally, I'm just going to make my skill level text equal to locked. Now in order to avoid getting unwanted error messages, I'm just going to go back up to my onValidate method and add one more condition here, so that if we've assigned a skill scriptable object and if our skill level text has also been assigned, then we'll update UI. With that done, we're ready to run our next test. So I'm just going to go into my prefab one more time here. You'll see that there's a spot here now for our text. So I'm just going to grab my level text and drag it in there. You'll see now that if I click is unlocked, it goes white. And when it is not unlocked, it's grayed out. I can also give it a current level like say 3, and you'll notice that as the number changes, the number on the slot is also changing. All right, that's working quite well. Now that we've got our scriptable objects and we can customize our appearance, we want to make it so that we can actually press these buttons and have them do something. Just as a refresher, you'll remember that each of these skill slots is in fact a button with a button component. However, I don't want to have to assign the onClick method for each one of these, and so we're going to use our code to do that for us. I'll begin by heading into the skill slot script, where I'm just going to make a public button reference, which we can call our skill button. This will allow us to talk to that button component. Now we can come down to our update UI and just make it so that if we've unlocked the button, it becomes interactable. And if we haven't yet unlocked it, we'll set interactable to false. This just makes it so that we will or will not be able to actually click the button. Just like that, we're ready to add our final script for this video, which is going to be the skill tree manager. We're going to get this script talking to each of our skill slots. So let's get rid of start and update, and then we can create a public skill slot array, which we'll just call skill slots. We're also going to make a public TMP text reference, which will be our points text. Don't forget to add the namespace using TM Pro. Points text will allow us to display the number of ability points we currently have. Now in order to display that, we actually need the data. So let's make a public integer, which will be our available points. Next, I'm going to recreate my start method. Then I'm going to make a for each loop. This is just going to loop through each of the items in our array. So for each skill slot, we'll give them the name slot. In our skill slots array, we just want to talk to them. So let's type in slot.skillButton. Here we're just talking to that button reference we made in our skill slots. We want to tell them what to do when we click on them. And essentially we just want to add a listener to them. And that listener is going to make it so that if we click on them, they tell their specific slot that it should try to upgrade its skill. Now for the moment, this is going to give us an error. That's just because we have not created that method yet. But ultimately, this will make it so that each individual slot knows what to do when we click it. So let's head over to our skill slot now and actually create that method so that it can do something when we click on them. We'll begin by making that method a public void called try_upgrade_skill. Make sure this is public so that our other script can talk to it. And here we're just going to do a check. If this skill has been unlocked and if the current level of this skill is less than our scriptable object's max level, then that means we can upgrade it. So we're going to want to make its level go up by 1. Hitting ++ is just the same thing as adding 1. And then once we've made it go up by 1, we want to update our UI. Back in our skill tree manager, we can see that the error is now gone. And just before we test this, we're going to add one more method. This is going to be a public void, which will update our ability points. It will take in an integer, which is just the amount we want to update it by. So here we will add the amount to our available points. And now we want to make sure that our points text is equal to, and I just want mine to always say points, so I'll type that in quotation marks, and then I'll add available points. Now we want to run this in our start method so that as soon as we start the game, our points show up. So we'll just say update ability points, and we don't actually want to change the value, so we'll just pass in a 0. Now we've got a little bit of setup to do in Unity. First of all, I'm going to go to my skill button prefab and just make sure that we actually drag the button component down into the skill button reference. Next, we want to actually attach this manager to our skills canvas. So let's click on the canvas, go to add component, and at that point we can type in our skill tree manager. It's got a couple of references to fill in, so let's make sure that our skill points text is actually dragged into that box. And we also want to update our skill slots. To do this, I'm just going to lock the inspector here so that this menu stays open. I'll click and then hold down Shift to drag all of my skill buttons into that slot. If I open it up, you can see they've all appeared. And because I've created 2 trees here, I want to do the same thing for my magic tree and grab all of its slots as well. I'm also just going to give myself some ability points for when we run our first test. That said, we're not quite ready to run our test yet. First, I'm just going to unlock my inspector here, and then we'll click on my skills canvas. I just want to make sure that my canvas group is set up. If you followed the last video, you may have one of these yourself, and we just want to make sure that the entire canvas is interactable and blocking raycasts. This is just what makes it so that it can detect our clicks when we go to click on the buttons. So now as soon as we get in the game, you'll notice that our points total updated. I can click on these locked buttons, but they won't do anything. However, our 1 slot, which we clicked unlocked on, can now be upgraded when I click on it. You'll notice that our skill points are not going down at this point, but we are now able to actually upgrade things. So now what we need is for our skill slots to be able to communicate to the skill tree manager once an ability point has been spent that it needs to subtract that point. However, I don't want to create a situation of tight coupling. So like we introduced in the level up system, we're going to use the observer pattern here. So I'm going to make a public static event action. This will be of type skill slot. We're just going to call this one on ability points spent. And we are going to get an error at first. I'm just going to right click on the action here and add using system, though you could also just go up to the top and type in the namespace yourself. So now that we've created this action, we actually just need to invoke it. So to actually say when this action is going to happen. Now we want to do this anytime we upgrade a skill. So let's come down to after we've upgraded the level once. Here we'll type the name of our event, on ability points spent. We'll then put invoked, and in brackets we're going to type this. And all that this does is that it passes this specific skill slot into any scripts that are listening. Now we just need to go to our skill tree manager and make sure that it is listening for that message. We're actually going to do this in the onEnable method. So let's create that. And then we're just going to type in skill slot.onAbilityPointSpent. And we're going to put plus equals, which just means we're subscribing, saying we want to listen to it. And whenever that message is called, we want to call the handle ability points spent method. We'll get an error for now because we haven't created that, but don't worry, we'll fix that. We'll then just copy and paste this, change it to on disable, and make it so that we unsubscribe. Now we can just come down a little lower in our skill tree manager and actually create that method. So we'll make a private void method called handle ability points spent. Now remember, we passed in the skill slot itself by typing this. And so now we want to make sure that this one's ready to receive that parameter. So we'll type in skill slot. So now when this method calls, we're going to do a check. If our available points are greater than 0, then we want to make sure that our ability points get updated and 1 is actually taken away. We can then save all of our scripts and head back into Unity to do our next test. All right, so there's no setup necessary. When we get in the game, we can just start spending ability points, and you'll see that they are in fact subtracting. I could give myself more, and if I keep clicking, I can't spend them as this ability is already maxed out, and the other ones are currently locked. Now, in order to unlock other potential skills or tiers, we need to know when a specific skill has been maxed out. So to do this, we're going to create another event action. So let's make a public static event action of type skill slot, and we'll call this one on skill maxed. Once again, now that we've created the event, we need to actually invoke it. And so now each time we upgrade a skill, we're going to do a check. If the current level of that skill has surpassed or equaled its max level, then we want to make sure that onSkillMaxed gets invoked. Once again, we're going to pass along this specific skill slot so that our skill manager knows which skill slot is actually sending the message. Once again, our skill tree manager will need to subscribe to these methods, so we can just type skillslot.onSkillMaxed and make sure that we use a plus equals so that we subscribe to it. We'll then copy that line, put it into our onDisable, and just make sure to change it to a negative so that we unsubscribe. We can now scroll down and create that method. So let's make a private void called handleSkillMaxed. As with our other method, this one needs to take in the parameter of a skill slot so it knows which slot sent its message. And for now, what we want to do is whenever a skill is maxed, we're going to send out a message to every single skill slot we have. So to do this, we're going to create a for each loop, and we'll loop through each skill slot, we can call them slot, in our skill slots method. And all we want to do for now is tell each of the slots that it should be unlocked. Be careful, as this will probably want to autocorrect to is unlocked, as we haven't created the locked method yet. So it's okay that that error is there, as we're just going to pop back into skill slot and create that right away. So in our skill slot method, we can create a public void unlock method. And for now, we're simply going to make it that when this is called, is unlocked is set to true for this skill slot. And then we'll also update our UI so that it changes the text and the color to match. Now at the moment, this isn't going to work exactly as intended, but we are at a point where we can test. So let's save all these scripts and head back to Unity. Now we've come to the point where we're ready to actually have scriptable objects on each of these slots. So if you'd like to, now would be a great time to actually make that happen. That said, if you want to wait and do that later, you can actually just click all of your slots and do as I'm doing, which is that I'm just going to add the same skill to every single slot that I have. Now, since I've not unlocked them, they're all going to turn gray, as I've only clicked unlocked for the one. This affords us a good chance to test, as now, once I've maxed out this skill and I click it again, it simply unlocks every single skill in the game. Again, that's not what we want ultimately, but it does mean that so far our code is working as we've written it. So obviously this is a little out of control at the moment, so let's go to our skill tree manager and add some checks so that we don't just wantonly unlock everything every time we max a single skill. And here, as we're looping through our slots, we're just going to check first so that if the slot is not already unlocked and the slot can be unlocked. So we'll create a can unlock skill method. If those two facts are satisfied, then we will unlock our slots. Let's head back to skill slots so that we can create that method now. I'm just going to come down below where we try to upgrade the skill, but above where it gets unlocked, as that just makes logical sense to me. This time around, rather than a public void, we're going to make a public bool method, meaning it's going to return a value, which will be either true or false. And we're going to make it return true by default. And essentially what we want to just do is have logic in here that will try to prove it false. However, if it can't prove it false, it will say, yes, we can unlock this skill. Now, before we can prove or disprove whether or not the slot can be unlocked, we need to create some prerequisites. We'll do this with a list, which will just create a box in Unity similar to an array where we can drag the different skill slots that need to be unlocked before this slot can be activated. So for example, if you want to have a linear progression working down the panel, you would just have to grab the slot above, drag it into the prerequisite slot, and now you will only be able to unlock it if the skill above it has already been unlocked. You could also add as many of these as you want, making some ultimate ability that requires every single skill to be unlocked first. For testing purposes here, I'm just going to make a single branch on this tree so that my combat skill down the middle here, each one relies on the one directly above it as a prerequisite before it can be unlocked. All right, with that set up, we can come back into our script and create our logic trying to prove that we cannot unlock the skill. For this, we're going to use a for each loop. We're just going to go through every skill slot. I'm going to call each one a slot in our prerequisite skills. Here, we're just going to perform a check. So if each prerequisite slot has been unlocked, we can move on. However, if it has not been unlocked, we're going to return a false value here. We're also going to create another potential way to return a false value, and that will just be if the slot's current level is less than its max level. So if it hasn't been unlocked or it just hasn't been maxed out yet, it will return false, saying no, you can't unlock it. However, if both those things are satisfied, it will jump down to this true line here and return a true value. Now when we get in the game, we can continue to lock as normal. However, once it's maxed out, it will unlock everything in the game, except for the two slots whose prerequisites have not been met. I could give myself a little bit more ability points to spend here, and then once I've maxed this out, it will unlock the next one, so we can see that things are working as intended. We are almost done now, except that we have one remaining problem, which is simply that even though my points have run out, I can continue to spend points, unlocking more and more slots, even though I have no points left. So let's head into our script and fix that. Now the reason we're having this problem is because every time we click a button, our try upgrade skill method gets called, which just automatically, as long as the skill's ready to be unlocked and isn't maxed out, levels it up. There's no check to see if we actually have the ability points to do so. So let's pop into our skill tree manager. Now the reason we're running into this problem is because at the start of the game, our skill tree manager tells every button that when clicked, it should try to upgrade its skill. However, we want to add an intermediary here that first checks to see if we actually have a skill point before we do that. So we'll just get rid of the try upgrade skill part, add a lambda expression, and instead call the check available points method. We'll then create that method, and this is just a really simple check that's gonna say, hey, do we actually have a skill point? And then if it does, it will do what we were doing before, which is tell the slot to upgrade its skill. All right, with that done, we can get into the game, and now when our points run out, we will no longer be able to continue wantonly upgrading things. We'll have to actually add some skill points to our manager if we want to do that. All right, that's working quite well. As a quick little demonstration here, I just took the time to create a whole bunch of skills for each of these slots and set them up with their own unique parameters. I then just dragged in a bunch of prerequisites, mostly having them need the skill above to be set, but giving a couple more complex ones that required multiple prerequisites. With that set up, things look kind of like this, where once you upgrade one skill, it unlocks the next one after it. So overall, things are working well. I can give myself more skill points and just keep spending away until I've unlocked everything. Hope you found this one helpful. In our next video, we'll set this up so that we get points when gaining levels, and we'll actually make it so that it affects things in game, like our stats, and also giving us the ability to do new actions. I hope to see you in that video. Until then, this is Matt with Nightrun Studio. Cheers.